Hi, I'm John Jukes from Waipukuro, or Waipak as the white man calls it. That's in Central Hawke's Bay, New Zealand. I came here 30 years ago. This town's water supply is fluoridated. When I got here I noticed there was a high incidence of fluorosis in the children's teeth, and I rang the provincial dental officer and reported this, and he told me to keep it quiet. And that was prompt for me to check this out a little further. So for the last 30 years I've been researching fluoridation. Some of the conclusions I've come to are these. Fluoridation of a water supply to prevent tooth decay doesn't work. The Twin Cities study between Napier and Hastings in New Zealand proved this. Fluoride is not a nutrient. Tooth decay is a feature of diet and social circumstance. To put a medication in a water supply is a nonsense pharmacologically. Fluoride is a toxin at a very low dosage. Fluoride in the form that we put it in the water is a category 8 poison. It is illegal to dispose of this into the air, onto the land, or into the water. Yet only approximately 1% goes in the mouth and the rest goes down the drain into the local water supply. Fluoride changes into the local river, should I say. Fluoride changes the structure of all bony tissues, i.e. it affects not only the teeth but also the entire skeleton. Fluorine competes with iodine and thyroid function. Fluoride affects the brain. Fluoride affects the pineal gland. If one wishes to influence dental tissues with fluoride, it should be applied topically, i.e. rubbed on the teeth, and not swallowed. After 30 years of study, I conclude that fluoride should not be put in the water supply. Councils do not have the knowledge nor the mandate to fluoridate a water supply. Thank you.
Mary Byrne, listening to John Jukes there from 2012, something struck me very, very hard. This campaigning to stop fluoride in the water, the drinking water, the showering water, the food cooking water of humans around the world has been going on for a long time, has it not? When did this really begin, this campaign to stop fluoride, the fluoride poisoning of humanity?
Well, it actually started right at the beginning. You know, when they started fluoridation, there were always people trying to stop it. So it's been going on since, 1950, really, is when the campaigns first started in the USA. And then in New Zealand, the first place that started was Hastings in 1954, and then Lower Hutt in 1957. And there was a big campaign in Lower Hutt, and people even went as high as the Privy Council, and they mortgaged their houses to stop fluoridation. But the Privy Council ruled that it did not make the water less wholesome, and it was allowed.
All right, we're going to get into the crucial part of this interview, which is the recent ruling just this week, and we're just the end of September 2024, this week, against fluoridation in the water. But before that, a couple of things. I will put the interview you and I did about a year or so ago underneath this interview. A couple of things to establish your credibility to speak on this issue, and also just exactly what fluoride is, that it is waste material, basically, from a very toxic industry. So what's your qualification to speak on this, Mary, for those who haven't met you online before?
Well, Liz, I've been researching this since 1999. So what happened was, I grew up with fluoridated water, thought that that was fine, had sort of the same propaganda that everybody else had. And then, but I was living in a non-fluoridated suburb in 1999, and I happened to read a book by a New Zealand writer called Tony Jeffries, and she had a little chapter on all sorts of things. And when I read the one about fluoride, I was really amazed that we would have fluoridation when there was obviously a whole lot of doubt about its safety. I thought you wouldn't put something in the drinking water if you didn't absolutely have to, for cleaning the water, if there were doubts about its safety. And then as it happened, about 2 months later, the Lower Hutt City Council tried to fluoridate the suburb I was in, which was Petone. And so I thought, no, we don't want fluoridation. And I went round to my friend's place and I said to her, we should do something about this. And she says, yeah, we should. So we had a big campaign and we actually kept fluoridation out of Petone, and it still is out of Petone. So, and over those years, I've been actively engaged in trying to stop fluoridation within the whole country. And, what happened after Petone, because I'd found out so much about fluoride, I realised that, well, I felt compelled. I felt compelled to try and stop it throughout the whole country because I knew then how harmful it was. Actually, I didn't actually know it was as harmful as what I do today, but I knew it was harmful, and I knew that that it was really wrong, that they should not be poisoning us through the drinking water.
And we'll
So,
get how industry driven it is, but I do want to really praise you, Mary. The website you have, which I've been looking at along with my other research for this, your website's extraordinary. It's got everything that a mum and dad should know, and it's easy to access. Give us the website where people can follow up this interview and really research. The articles are so clear.
yeah, it's fluoridefree.org.nz. Yeah, I mean, I always feel like it needs updating. This thing's pressing me right now so that it needs to be updated, but it has got a lot of information.
Yep. And the second question, before we get into this important US court decision, the second question is, what exactly is fluoride and where does it come from? It will shock many people who are told, as John Jukes in that little clip that we just saw, dentists are being told it's safe. And he was courageous enough in 2012 to say it's not safe, it's a poison, and it's really bad in the drinking water, and it would never be allowed in the air. So where's it coming from? What is it?
Yeah, well, fluoride can occur naturally in the environment, and it does. It does occur in water supplies around the world. In some places, there's high amounts, and the people, are terribly impacted. The children's bones get deformed, and the adults get bent over, and people have thyroid problems and all sorts of things. But the fluoride chemical that they put into our drinking water is not even the natural sort. What it is hydrofluorosilicylic acid, which is scrubbed out of the chimneys of the phosphate fertilizer industry. So the phosphate fertilizer industry has fluoride. A couple of fluoride gases get let off when they're making the phosphate, and they're not allowed to let those gases out into the air because they pollute everything around it. So crops, cattle, the people, even things like etching the glass of, windows. So everything gets contaminated. So what they do is they spray water into it, and that mixes with the fluoride gases, and that comes out as hydrofluorosilicylic acid, and then they have a toxic waste problem. So they can't just go and, dump it into the river down the road, or a lake, or the sea even, or the land. They can't just dump it in there. But what they do is they put it in those tankers and sell it to the councils, and the councils drip feed it through our public water supply.
I mean, that is mind-boggling for humans to take in, but it's not as mind-boggling now as when I first talked to you a year or so ago, because we have come to, if you are intelligent, we have all come to a conclusion that our governments around the world are not our friends. They're not standing up for the health and well-being of the people. And RFK Jr., standing up in America, has said this very thing. The Democrats in particular in America are all about harming their own citizens. He wants to change it, but we have to come to terms with the fact that our governments, both national and local, many of them are not out for the well-being of the people. It's shocking, Mary, isn't it?
Oh, it is really, really shocking. And the fact that it's a toxic waste is really shocking. And in the early years, I didn't actually talk about it that much because it just seemed so unbelievable. It's just hard to fathom that they will take a toxic waste and put it into our drinking water.
And
Who
then
needs any
beyond that,
studies?
with a massive propaganda campaign, sell it to us as good and essential for our teeth. And yet we have a dentist in the opening piece there saying it can cause fluorosis, which is where you get those little yellow stains in the teeth, isn't it?
Yeah, it's little spots on the teeth, and John Jukes is a brave dentist, and another really brave one is Laurie Brett from Whangarei, and we've had some others around the country, but it's been really difficult for them to stand up. I know that with Laurie Brett, when he first stood up against fluoridation, years and years ago, before my time, and he tried to tell the other dentists, they just sort of laughed him out of the room. They just ridiculed him and everything. And then actually how come Laurie Brett got into it was because of John Colquhoun, and he was the principal dental officer in Auckland, and he was one of our first main promoters of fluoridation. And so he was sent on a worldwide trip to have a look at all the places around the country that had started fluoridation. And what he found behind the scenes was none of them were finding that fluoride was actually reducing dental decay. Dental decay was coming down anyway in all places around the country, around the world. And so he said when he got back, he told his superiors about that, and they more or less told him to be quiet. And then he said, well, he might not have done anything more if he hadn't have found out it was harmful. But then when he found out it was harmful, then, he felt compelled that he had to do something about it. And, he consequently ended up losing his job. And that dental fluorosis, that's, the dentists and the Ministry of Health tell us it's just cosmetic, but it's such a ridiculous thing to say. It's so unthinking, because what it means is that the enamel of the teeth have been damaged, and probably that mechanism is that it's poisoning the enzymes that help lay down the enamel on the teeth. So if it's poisoning those enzymes, it's poisoning other enzymes in our body, and they know that fluoride is a potent enzyme poisoner. And that's a reflection of our bones. And it's the first outward sign of fluoride poisoning. So for the Ministry of Health to say, oh, it doesn't matter, it's just cosmetic, it's just so stupid. It sort of beggars belief, doesn't it? If somebody is overexposed to lead, they get a thin blue line on their gum, and no one would say, oh, don't worry about it because we don't see your gum. It would be alarming. We should all be alarmed. There's like 40% or perhaps more now of children in New Zealand with some form of dental fluorosis. So we know for certain at least 40% of children in New Zealand have been poisoned by fluoride.
That's extraordinary. And there is an article on your website, I recommend everyone go to it, saying fluoride is the new lead. We all were horrified at what lead could do. And lead, interestingly, affects the IQ of children in particular, of all of us, and makes people very, very passive and able to be directed. So let's get into the court case, because now I think people need to really focus on what has happened this week in a US court, and then we're going to talk about what's happening around the country here and what we can all do to back Mary up and to stop this fluoride poisoning of New Zealanders. So what is the court case? Can you sum up what happened? What did they apply for?
Yeah, so this is a federal court case in the USA. So what happened was Fluoride Action Network in the USA, they took the situation to the Environmental Protection Agency, and they said that they need to do a risk analysis because, we know that fluoride is a neurotoxin. They need to do a risk analysis. This is back in 2016. The EPA refused, so Fluoride Action Network sued the EPA. So that's what got it into court, and it's been going on all these years, because in the intervening years there's been this National Toxicology Program systematic review. So the court was paused for a couple of years waiting for that review to come out, or for a few years. So what they did is they took it under the Toxic Substances Control Act which says that a citizen can sue the Environmental Protection Agency to do a risk assessment if it's required. So it goes to the court, and the court decides whether or not something poses an unreasonable risk. And if it does, the Environmental Protection Agency has to take action. So in this case, the court has reviewed all of the scientific evidence. So, it's been a huge case. It's the first of its kind. It's the first one that's taken the EPA to court under this act. So it's precedent setting. So we'll see what happens with other chemicals in the future. And they found that, there was preponderance of evidence, is what the judge said, is that fluoride is neurotoxic. So the EPA admit that fluoride is neurotoxic. They don't even argue that fluoride's a neurotoxin. So from the National Toxicology Program, which is the highest scientific body that's been put onto this subject, so this is a big team of toxicologists. They've done everything that you would think a scientific body should do to review all of the research of fluoride and IQ, which was 72 studies at the beginning. So the NTP said that fluoride is neurotoxic at 1.5 part per million. Now, in the USA, they fluoridate as a maximum of 0.7 part per million, but in New Zealand, we have a range of 0.7 to 1 part per million with a target of 0.85. So we fluoridate
so
at
we're
a
higher. We're
Yeah,
much
we're
higher.
higher. We're higher than the USA and Canada and other countries. I mean, there's not that many countries that actually do it, but we're one of the highest, possibly the highest. I'm not 100% sure. But so yeah, we're quite a bit higher than 0.7.
For
So
people who aren't staying with you on this, Mary, part per million just means that amount of fluoride per million, what, drops of water?
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It means 1 part per million, but the other way to look at it is 1 milligram per litre. And I've seen the information lately from the court and everything, they're much more talking about milligrams per litre. So, and that's an easier thing probably for most of us to get our head around, is a milligram per litre.
Okay. But what we do learn from this is New Zealand seems to have one of the highest amounts of fluoride going into our water, and an amount that was less was considered very risky by the court. Is that correct?
Yes. So the National Toxicology Program, it had said 1.5 part per million, but it also recognised that there's been really good studies that have been funded by the US government that came out of Canada, and they were at 0.7 part per million. They were actually a little bit less than that. So the judge acknowledged that these high quality studies had come from lower than 1.5, and so then he said, but even if we just take 1.5 part per million, because the EPA agree 1.5 part per million is neurotoxic, then you have to have a margin of safety. And he said for fluoridation, really, that should be 100. We should have a margin of 100 because you're going to everybody and it's all day, every day, bottle-fed babies, pregnant women, all sorts of people on dialysis, athletes, etc. But he said, even if we just use 10, which they use for other things at times, that brings it down to 0.15, and that makes fluoridation gone. So, and that's what the judge ruled. He said, so what he said was fluoridation, he agreed, with the whole, what the case was, poses an unreasonable risk. Fluoridation does. And now the Environmental Protection Agency is obligated to reduce or remove that risk. So the only way you could reduce that risk is to remove it. You can only stop fluoridation.
Wow. So I'll just read what he said. Plaintiffs have proven, as you said, by a preponderance, that means the weight of the evidence, that water fluoridation at the level of 7 parts per million, the prescribed optimal level of fluoridation in the United States, presents an, quote, unreasonable risk of injury to health or to the environment. So he included human health and the threat to the environment. Just go over that briefly. What do you think you've addressed some of them, but what do you think are the very worst risks to our health as human beings, having this, in effect, forced sort of medication? They say, oh, it's good for you, it's good for your teeth. So we don't have a choice if they put it in the council water. What do you think are the worst risks you've come across, Mary, from fluoridation?
I do think the worst risk is the neurotoxic harm.
And by that, you're meaning
because
damage to our brain development, damage to children's brain development. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely damage to children's growing brain. So, for in utero and early childhood, that's, the brain is growing at a lot, rapidly it's growing, and that growth then cannot ever be changed. So what happens at that time is now permanent. So, something else, you might be able to detoxify from. But once you cause that brain damage at that time, that's it. So that what it actually works out about is it's an average of a loss of about 4 to 5 IQ points from fluoridation in New Zealand. And that's the average. So somebody might not have lost any, but somebody else has lost a lot more. So if we just take the average, that means everybody who has been born in a fluoridated area, so that's a lot of people in New Zealand, that's millions of people, has most probably had their IQ reduced, most probably. And that is not the only harm. The other part of it is ADHD, depression, anxiety. So that's the other thing that the studies are coming out showing for, early childhood and things. And, that's what we've got in New Zealand, isn't it? Anxiety, depression.
Reflected in a massively high suicide rate for years. This is really, really serious. Now, what about the adult brain that has fully developed? Can it still threaten that adult brain as well? What are studies showing there, Mary?
Yeah, there's not nearly as much study on that, but it makes sense that if it's neurotoxic, I mean, it is just like lead. When we think of fluoride, we've got to just think lead, and then we get the picture. Oh, they're adding lead to the drinking water. This is Flint. This is Flint, Michigan, out of the whole country. Great. So I would say that dementia and Alzheimer's is definitely one that's been connected because fluoride binds with aluminium and helps it cross the blood-brain barrier. So, and we know that fluoride accumulates in the pineal gland as well. So my guess, of course, is that it is going to be related to this huge increase that we've had in dementia and Alzheimer's. And the other thing, the other things that are really serious about fluoridation is the effect on the thyroid, and that will all be connected with the neurotoxicity, because that might be the mechanism. It's not exactly, no one exactly knows yet what the mechanism is of why it's reducing IQ, but that might be why, because if a mother's thyroid level is low, they know that affects the IQ of a child. That's already well established. And then we also know that fluoride reduces the thyroid function. So, that goes hand in hand. And so maybe that's the reason. And then when you think about the effect on the thyroid, about the effect that will be having on our society. So you take a woman who's got a low thyroid, and it's hard for the doctors to be able to diagnose low thyroid. They reckon it actually has to be quite bad before, that is actually diagnosed. So, but it makes someone tired. It causes, people they can't lose weight. They're tired and depressed. Now, if someone's tired, they go to work. They can't do much else more than go to work. They're just going to want to cook tea, sit down in front of the TV because they're tired. And then say they've got a child who's got ADHD. And I shouldn't laugh, because that will be happening. So you've got a tired mother with a child with ADHD. If you just
affected by fluoride, both affected by fluoride ingestion. It's horrific.
Exactly. So when you think about the effect that this must be having on our country, and then we've got the effect on the skeleton. So they know that fluoride, 50% of all fluoride that we accumulate, that we ingest, accumulates in our bones or soft tissue. So skeletal fluorosis, which is what you get from too much fluoride in your skeleton, the symptoms of that are exactly the same as arthritis. But in New Zealand, the doctors they won't know that. They won't know. They think that skeletal fluorosis is just something that happens in India or something. They've got, they're not over that. So they won't realize that a lot of people coming to them with arthritis, what they actually have is skeletal fluorosis. Well, most probably, but nobody knows, because it's just been completely off people's radar. The only thing the government ever looks at is they look at children's teeth. Even though we've all been drinking this, it started 70 years ago, all they look at is the teeth. It really is mind-boggling, isn't it?
I mean, I'm sure people say it to you, but do you realize quite how extraordinary you are? You've taken this one subject. You must have read so many articles and watched so much information and talked to so many experts about all of this. It's a real testament to what one human being can do when when that human being is determined to self-educate and really get the proper science, not the industry paid science, which is what has probably got fluoride into our water in the first place, the lobbyists, you have really done an extraordinary job here. Take us into the effects on the environment of fluoride as well, because the judge in America referred to the environment as well.
Yeah, well, fluoride is an environmental poison, which is why, it's not allowed to go out of the chimneys. So then what they do is they still put it out into the environment, is they just put it out via us, so that we we collect some of it in our bodies before it goes out into the environment. But most of it goes straight to the environment. It goes through our public water supply, and we only drink something like 1% or perhaps less of what's going through the public water supply. So it's really just, such a con job. It's such a con job that they take this environmental waste and then put it in the public water supply and then put it straight out into the environment. So it just poisons everything. I mean, the fluoride, the whole sort of thing about fluoride is it was an environmental poison, and the industries were worried about being sued. That's the very beginning of it. So particularly the aluminium industry, but steel, zinc, and other things, they had this big pollution problem, and they were being sued by farmers and workers. And so what they did is they had this fluoride lawyers committee, and they were trying to figure out, what should we do? How do we stave this off, because this could be a big, big problem for us. And and they were making a lot of money also, because fluoride is the component in Freon gas, which is what they use in air conditioners and in the fridge and all the rest of it. And DuPont made a huge, huge amount of money out of that. So then what happened, there was this guy called Francis Freire, and he was the director of the American Aluminium Company, and he had heard that there had been this dentist who seemed to have found that fluoride might be good for teeth. Prior to that, they all knew that fluoride was not good for teeth because it caused dental fluorosis and the teeth were more crumbly. But then this one dentist said, "Oh no, it gets into the teeth, it makes them stronger." So this guy Francis Freire, he suggested, maybe we could put the fluoride in the water. And that's like that was the first thing about how they turned what they knew to be a pollutant into this thing that was so great they could put it in the drinking water. And then if we get into like the early or the late 1990s, early 2000s, there was this Dr. Phyllis Mullinix, and she was a scientist, and she had done research in 1995 on rats, etc. But anyway, she was a witness in a court case, and she was, supporting the plaintiffs who were saying that they'd been harmed by fluoride. And then what the defendants did is they got a tube of toothpaste, and they said, "So you're trying to tell us that this has caused all that harm, and that all the people on the fluoridated water, blah blah blah." So you can see how they turned it around with so much propaganda, telling us that fluoride was, it's so good, everybody brushes their teeth, so good, you can put it in the drinking water, and then how difficult it made it for people to be able to sue the industry.
And it's always the way where it's a slow poisoning. Even with the COVID-19 rollout, this is a relatively slow poisoning by comparison with that. We are going to see the results of that and are seeing them already. Whereas fluoride feels, Mary, like it's more over maybe 10 or 20 years that slow poisoning really hits in on the human body. Nevertheless, it is poison that we are putting in our bodies. I liked what John Duke said at the beginning too. If you want to use it, well, free world, you can use it topically, use it in those toothpastes, but it shouldn't be in the water for everybody. I'm going to add a piece from your website that I found equally interesting from a professor who was, among other things, he's talking about breastfeeding. Do not, preferably breastfeed your child. Do not use fluoridated water in a bottle if you're bottle feeding, because of that drop in IQ that's been proven through tests. But he said a fascinating thing, Mary, that the breast milk seems to have some way of stopping fluoride going from the mother, even if she's drinking fluoridated water. It seems to have a wonderful protective mechanism where it won't go into the breast milk, into the baby. So even Mother Nature knows that this is a dangerous thing and somehow protects the baby. That's extraordinary. We'll put that up at the end, that talk. But isn't
Yeah.
that showing us that nature knows to protect the human body from fluoride as a poison?
Yeah, that's right. And bottle-fed babies receive around about 200 times more fluoride than a breastfed baby. So it just seems like just so obvious that we should not be doing that. It's not like it's a nutrient in any sense whatsoever. We're talking about a poison. And, to have those sort of levels, it's really is astounding that we've had fluoridation, isn't it? Really, it's just so obvious that we shouldn't have fluoridation, but people have been so propagandized over these years, and the media has not done its job.
Well,
Just hasn't done enough critical thinking.
that's the thing. That's the whole thing around the world that we've been seeing lately. And a lot of people are waking up to that. The media is not doing its job. We're not being told the truth by industry, and we're being poisoned on multiple fronts. Now let's move into the interesting part, the positive part, the uplifting part, Mary, about what we can do, because the people here can really grab this court case in America and take it to our government, take it to our politicians and say, we demand you do something about it. So let's get into that. What do you suggest people in New Zealand can do to stop this?
Yeah, well, I think that people have to keep going to the council, as much as I know that is difficult at times, because there have been people, we've had a lot of good people who have been stepping up over this last couple of years because of the directives, and they've done a whole lot of work, and they've done petitions, and they've gone to the councils, and they've just got pushback and pushback because the councillors just say, oh no, we have to do it because the government says so. But I think that we have to keep on with the councillors, and we have to get them to understand that this is like lead. That's one of the things. We also have to get them, and then we have to get them to at least speak up. So we've got Mayor Drysdale up in Tauranga, and he's saying, he would prefer not to have fluoridation. Like actually, most of those councils that have been directed, they didn't actually want fluoridation, but it's been foisted on them, and they don't feel confident that they won't get fined by the Ministry of Health, because it's a huge fine. But I don't think actually that they would. But anyway, they're too scared to take that chance. They've been too scared. And but they should at least be standing up and saying, they need to push back on the government and say, you're basically asking us to put lead in the drinking water. We're not comfortable with that. But it feels as if they're too scared to even say that. They don't do enough research is actually the problem. That's why they don't feel comfortable. If they did a bit more research, that they would know that they're on very solid ground to be saying this. But then part of that problem is because of the media. It's because the way the media has treated people over the years, if they've spoken up about fluoridation, has scared people off, because they're scared of being called tinfoil hats, conspiracy theorists, blah, 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 that sort of thing. But if enough people spoke up, well, that wouldn't happen, would it? And, I've been on the phone today ringing up mainstream media through the Science Media Centre, like looking at all the people there who are listed as journalists and that who report on science. And, one of them said that I should just contact public health. And it's like, well, obviously I've already contacted them, but that's their job as a journalist, is that they're meant to find out, and they're meant to question the government. They shouldn't just be a mouthpiece for the government. And so, that can be annoying. But then I've actually had 3 good conversations. And so I would encourage people to be ringing, they definitely should be ringing their local newspapers and having, try to keep calm and have a nice conversation, because I have found 3 people today who are interested, They've said, oh, okay, yeah, I'm interested in that. So, and it can be a bit frustrating, I know, but I think that we do need to do that. And so we need to be writing to the councils, going to the councils, writing to all the MPs, going to visit the MPs, because this is the other thing, is that most of the MPs don't know about it, and they get scared off from the media as well, because they don't want to be the one called a conspiracy theorist. But I mean, I think it's just too far gone now to be worried about being called a conspiracy theorist. And, these people have got to, get a backbone, have some
And there's,
integrity.
and there's a major federal court case in America that everybody can print off. We'll put it underneath this interview. You can print it off. You can highlight what the judge says. You can then have copies of that to present to your local council, your local MP. These are good ideas. I also think it's a great way to bring communities together. God knows that they have tried every way, Mary, have they not, to divide New Zealand. Reach out to any of your neighbours, your local community, your local book club, whatever you're part of, and say, let's all gather at next week's or next month's council meeting, but all of us armed very calmly with information from your site, from the court case, and we will simply stand up and insist on being heard. What about that?
Yes, definitely. And as you say, the ruling from the judge is really good. The first few pages where he gives the conclusion and the summary in there, it's really good what he says. So people just need to read that, or at least get people to read that to get the understanding. We have a petition, a parliamentary petition, and so we've got about 11,500 signatures online. We've got at least 2,000 paper-based at the moment, but we would really like people to go out and get more signatures. They can download the paper version from our website. I mean, if they just went around their friends and family and got 10 even, and then post it to us, that's great. That all adds up. And then that provides all those conversations. If people, yeah. And so you can get a couple of people. I mean, when I started in Petone, it was just my friend and I. That was all it was,
How many years ago again? What year was that?
25.
25 years.
25.
You
Yeah.
honestly, someone needs to put Mary forward for some of those silly awards that go to all the wrong people. And Mary, you'd be one of the highlights, because you actually deserve an award.
Well, I tell you what, there's always been people with me, and I wouldn't been able to do it without them.
Yeah.
So, in particular, I have to say Mark Atkin and Kane Titchener.
Yes.
They've both kept me going at times. I've had times when, like COVID, I've got distracted on that because that was so big and so important. But those two have, Mark's been there from the start, and Kane's been there for over 10 years now. So, and then there's been people throughout the time that, come and do their bit and then go, or, I think, and yeah, there's been people that come and then come back and all the rest of it. So, it's always been more than just one. You can never do anything of just one person. You always have to have support people around you who are dedicated as well,
What's interesting, Mary, is this is something that seems to be in the zeitgeist. It seems to be bouncing around the world. Really a lot of groups in different countries around the world are happening, is it coincidence, are happening to come together on this issue of fluoride. And I think it's a real gateway issue. If we, the people, can push back on these rotten lobbyists from corporates who have bought or bribed or persuaded or whatever they've done to these politicians and to the paid up corporate media, if we can push back and get this fluoride out of the water, it's kind of a flag on a hill to say we can push back on bigger issues like no more forced jabs for everybody, no more mandates, none of this coercion, because fluoride is a form of coercion. If we don't have a choice, if it's in our water, it's being coerced into us covertly, isn't it?
Oh, I totally agree with everything you're saying there. New Zealand Supreme Court has ruled that it's compulsory medical treatment. So once it's in the water, it's not really feasible that you can avoid it all the time. And even people in New Zealand now living in non-fluoridated areas, they might be buying they might be buying a soft drink or a beer or bread, you know, anything processed in a fluoridated area, and they're already getting that, you know, those fluoridation chemicals through their diet as it is. But, you know, that was one of the things that really spurred me on right at the start, was because I thought if they can poison us through the drinking water, and lie to us about what they're doing, then really we're in trouble. We're in trouble as a country, because if we can't stand up and say, I do not want toxic waste put into my drinking water, and I'm that apathetic that I will drink toxic waste in my drinking water and give it to my children because, you know, Ministry of Health says it's okay, there's something wrong. And it's not just with the authorities, it's with our culture. It's with our culture that we've felt so disempowered and so gullible in lots of ways that we'll, you know, just believe them.
And fluoride makes people compliant. That's the horrific thing. Tell us about the situation you mentioned, Mayor Drysdale in Tauranga. That's a good example. What is going on there, Mary? I know you're aware of the detail there.
Yeah, so there was a big group of people, over 200 people, that went to the council last month, or was it earlier this month, maybe at the beginning of this month, and said, you know, they do not want fluoridated water. And so the mayor had said that he is opposed to fluoridation, etc. And he was on RCR, Reality Check Radio, and he was saying that he said when it comes down to it, he thinks there should be a choice. And while I totally agree with that, and you know, I think that's hugely important, that we should never be compulsorily medicating people. That's what that is spiking someone's drink. It's totally illegal in any other situation. It's illegal apart from this one. But I also feel that if he really understood the situation, he wouldn't just be saying, when it comes down to it, it's choice. He'd be saying, when it comes down to it, I can't put a neurotoxin in the drinking water because it's even more important. It's even more important. You can't harm people by putting a poison in their drinking water. And now people's IQ is being reduced. So every baby born in Tauranga from now on, if they put that in, which they're saying they're going to, will be having their IQ reduced. And all the bottle-fed babies, that's an average of a 9 IQ point drop. It's so serious.
Wow. And so again, people of Tauranga, you could lead the way for the rest of New Zealand. If you win this battle, get behind the mayor, absolutely go to all the meetings, say we will not have fluoride, we've got unfluoridated water. How lucky are you in Tauranga at the moment? And really support him. But if Mayor Drysdale wants to reach out to you to fully understand this situation so he can push back on central government edicts, Mary, what's the best contact for you and for others who might want to send you emails? How can he get hold of you?
Well, just from our fluoride-free website. So I'm mary@fluoridefree.org.nz. You know, so it's easy to get hold of us. There's actually some really good people in Tauranga that he can speak to. And I know that some of them are requesting a meeting with him. So hopefully he'll do that.
Do you want to say their names? Do you want to say their names?
Oh, I'm not, I don't know if they want me to or not.
All right, that's fine. That's fine. But if people from Tauranga contact you privately, you could put them in touch with these good people.
Yeah. I would definitely put them in touch with the Tauranga group.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Tell us about also Section 23. Now, you mentioned that this is a key for New Zealanders to understand how powerful we can be if we use this. What's that one about, Mary?
Yeah, so in the Medicines Act, so what's happened with the law is that the Director General is now the sole decision maker for the whole of New Zealand. And so that is an amendment to the Health Act, which has given her that power. But also within the Health Act, Section 23 says that the local councils have to, there's a number of things, but one of the things they have to do is they have to protect the community's health. So you cannot, and if they are satisfied that there is a risk to health, they have to take steps to do something about that. So now that we have this court case in particular, I just feel there's no way that the Director General can take a council to court when they can just say, look, we can't do this. Under Section 23, we are not allowed, we have to protect the community's health. We can't go and harm it. You know, it's against the law for them to do that. And it's, you know, so if someone else was doing it, it would be against, they would have to do something about it.
Yep.
So under Section 23 of the Health Act, they cannot add a neurotoxin to the drinking water. So, you know, they could think that they're in a bind because they've got one law telling them to add fluoride and another law saying, well, you can't add it. So therefore they can say, we just can't do it at the moment. We need more clarity.
That's very good. And it's Section 23 of the Health Act, not the Medicines Act. And that is absolutely crucial for people to realize. You can take that to your councils and remind them you are not allowed to jeopardize the health of the people you represent. And so that puts them in that bind. They have to be able to stand up. Briefly, it's a dark part of New Zealand history, the whole Ardern government, but briefly talk about the role of Ashley Bloomfield enforcing this fluoride onto everybody.
Yeah, well, it was Ashley Bloomfield in his last week at work that he sent these directives to 14 councils and said, you must start fluoridation. And, you know, so he said that he undertook what he was supposed to under the legislation, but the legislation only says that they have to show that fluoridation is effective. They don't even have to show safety, and even that is just so. It was so basic what they've done that if you put any scrutiny on that doesn't even hold up. But I don't think Ashley Bloomfield cared about the truth about that at all. I think it was just a feather in his cap, to do what whoever it is that's telling him to do what he does.
To do the bidding of the corporates. And let's remind everybody, he then left New Zealand and has gone to, or he at least went to work overseas in the heart of the Gates Foundation, working for one of the Gates Foundation organizations. This is not a New Zealander any of us should be proud of. He's left a terrible wake of suffering Kiwis from those jabs. And I remember doing interview after interview, Mary, of desperate Kiwis who were wanting exemptions, including one mother who'd actually died when she had the jab and was brought back by the crash cart, and wrote to Ashley Bloomfield with full account of her very sorry story. And like many others, just got a standardized letter back signed by him saying, no, you must have the second jab and we will have a crash cart there for you if you die again. That is unforgivable. And this is the man who's forced fluoride just before he leaves. Who is the current head? Who's replaced him? I don't even know her name.
Oh, her name's Dr. Diana Safati. And she's just carrying on with what Ashley Bloomfield says and just doubling down actually on what Ashley Bloomfield has done. But I think going back to what you were saying before about this being a gateway into a whole lot of other issues and how it really does help for a whole lot of issues, because for one thing, people learning about fluoridation end up learning about a whole lot of other issues, such as what's gone on with COVID. It sort of provides that opening. They might not be open to the COVID thing particularly, but then they learn about fluoride, and then they learn about that because they meet people, and they meet people that they feel they can trust, and so they learn. And also the thing is it gives us hope that it's like, oh, eventually the truth does come out. Yes. It's like, oh, finally the truth came out, and I don't think it's going to take 70 years for the truth to come out about COVID. I really don't. I think
I think fluoride also, Mary, is a gateway to something else. It's a gateway to people waking up that the government is not your friend. At this stage in human history, the government has now been bought off or surrendered to these world bodies like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum. We will put under this the latest interview I've done with Andrew Bridgen, the former UK parliamentarian, who backs that up after 14 years in what is meant to be the mother of all parliaments, the mother of democracy in the UK. And he says, absolutely, politicians now around the world are sold out to corporate interests. So it wakes people up, because this has definitely been driven, the fluoride issue, by corporate interests, as you've spelled out so clearly. Anything else you want to say to finish, Mary? It's been really enlightening, and I think it will encourage a lot of Kiwis to now take action, get your groups going, and get along to every single council meeting you can in your area and demand that fluoridation be taken out of your water, your drinking water.
Yeah, definitely, Liz. And if they can collect signatures, and actually collecting petition signatures may be a really good way for people to meet each other. So if they could just get one friend, or they don't even have to get one friend if they're brave enough to go out by themselves, and they can start collecting signatures, and then they'll find that they get into some good conversations, and they can ask that person if they would like to help, explain to people how to get hold of the group that they can start up if there's no group in their area. And, we can go from there. So yeah, I think too that we need people to really home in on fluoridation right now, because this is a really critical time.
Yes.
We don't want to wait and say, oh, so many years ago that the federal court did this, because we kind of think that the Environmental Protection Agency might drag its feet. I mean, they've come kicking and screaming. They didn't want to do the risk assessment, so they might drag their feet about, reducing or reversing this risk. So in the meantime, we need places to stop, because all the information is there. All the science is there. The science is, there's more science of higher quality than there was with lead when lead was stopped in 1996. It doesn't get any better than this. So there's no excuse for it.
So many studies, and you can look up the website and possibly just print out one article or 2 or 3 articles and let people sit near you on a bench, perhaps in an area in a park, if you're there with your petition, and say, just sit for 5 minutes and read this article. I think that's a really good idea. And I do love, Mary, it's a way for communities to build something back again. I think we've been purposefully broken as a community through so much division and differing attitudes, and we need to come together so desperately. Feels like fluoride could be that issue to bring everybody together to push back on our government.
Yeah, it could be, Liz, because if somebody wants fluoride, they can brush their teeth. That's what most people do anyway. They buy a fluoride toothpaste, brush their teeth. So nobody's stopping someone doing what they want to do.
Yes.
So, it should be able to bring everybody together.
Wonderful to talk to you, and we'll keep in touch. Keep us updated if you get other information on where this court case goes, Mary. I reiterate that I just admire how hard and how long and how ethically you have worked to bring this to the attention of the New Zealand public. Thank you so much. This issue of fluoridation of our water. Thank you, Mary.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for all that you're doing as well. That's brilliant.
Wonderful.
So I'm a pathologist, and when I see a pattern in disease, I automatically start to try and think about mechanism. How can that pathology come about? So the last time I spoke in a fluoride forum was 10 years ago in Toronto, where I was asked to address that aspect in the light of the Chinese studies that were extant at that time. And now I'm going to do the same thing, but we have a lot more evidence to go on. And so that's already just been said. Okay, well, you have a chance to see the ravages of time now. This period of fetal development and infancy is a period of great vulnerability. An infant is not a small adult. The way they deal with chemicals is very different. And the ability to push the developmental process off course in general requires much lower doses of chemicals to achieve that. What we can tolerate as adults is not the same as with the infant.